As I record this video, Dana White just announced Holly Holm taking on Kayla Harrison at UFC 300, and yes, that is correct. The UFC has officially signed Kayla Harrison to what must be a pretty big deal, because she was getting a lot of money fighting for the PFL, but I'm going to talk about that just in a second, because I do want you guys to let me know what you think of the audio in this video in the comments. I've changed things up just a little bit. I don't just use a USB microphone like I would assume most YouTubers do. I actually use an audio interface into a pretty high quality microphone, because if you guys don't know, I did actually used to make music, so my audio setup is pretty complicated and very sensitive. I think in my last video I must have bumped something or something like that, and it just sounded terrible, so I do apologize for the audio in that video. Let me know what you think of the audio in this video, because I think I've fixed it. I've made a couple of changes to my system, and I've also brought the microphone closer to my face. So now, let's talk about this fight. I did want to use this video as a little bit of a tester for what my audio could sound like in future videos. Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison at UFC 300. A massive fight, and honestly, a lot of people are really down on this fight. I'm actually looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a pretty fun one. I do think Kayla Harrison is going to win. I think stylistically it's just a really good matchup for her. But I feel like the hype around this fight has absolutely nothing to do with this fight. I think the hype around this fight is probably just the fact that the UFC did sign Kayla Harrison, and I do think Kayla Harrison could bring a lot to the company, as she was one of the biggest names on the PFL roster at one point. We do know that she was unhappy with the PFL, and that's because I believe she wasn't even in the tournament last year. She was just part of the PFL's super fight division, which I think a couple of fighters have been put in, and what that is when they don't put you in the tournament, they just use you for big fights, and I feel like a lot of PFL fighters are unhappy in that situation, and Kayla Harrison did verbally say she wants to fight more often than PFL is giving her the fights, so it seems like she's left the PFL probably through some sort of agreement, and now she is signed to the UFC at 135 pounds. Now, remember, the UFC used to have a women's featherweight division, and it almost seemed like Kayla Harrison could be the face of that division. The UFC has obviously gotten rid of women's 145, that's obviously gone. So now they've signed Harrison, she has to be able to make 135, and she has to make 135 in about a month's time, because this event isn't even that far away at this point. I think it's not a month's time, in about 2.5 months time or so. But you guys get my point. We've never even seen her make 145, I don't think, if I'm correct in saying that, because when she fought for the PFL, it was all at 155 pounds. Now, I could be wrong. I am prepared to be wrong. 155, I'm assuming, is what most of her PFL fights were definitely taking place in anyway. Can she make 155? 135, I mean, sorry. I think it might be pretty tough, because she wasn't small at all for 155. You know, if you know Kayla Harrison, she has a lot of muscle to her. She's been an athlete all her life, so obviously with time she's built up a lot of muscle. I mean, she's probably got more muscle than me, I'll be honest. So making 135 could be tough. Stylistically though, this is a really good matchup for her. Holly Holm, as we all know, is a boxer, a very good boxer, in that she will be the better striker. And I know she's got good takedown defense. I think on paper her takedown defense is really, really good. But I don't think it's going to be enough to stop Kayla Harrison, because that's what Kayla Harrison is well known for. It's just absolutely dominating opponents on the ground. I think this could be a bit of a showcase kind of fight for Kayla Harrison, just because stylistically it's such a good matchup for her, which I think is smart, because I genuinely believe if Kayla Harrison goes out there and beats Holly Holm, they'll just give her a title shot, because Holly Holm, I believe, is ranked very highly right now in the UFC. They probably don't want Raquel Pennington as the champion. They would probably rather Juliana Pena as the champion. I feel like what they would do is do Pena versus Pennington sometime soon, maybe within like the next 4 or 5 months, and then Kayla Harrison fights the winner of that fight at the end of the year. And I think you see Kayla Harrison fighting for a title at the end of the year if she can beat Holly Holm. A pretty big fight. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of people on Instagram saying this isn't the fight they asked for. No one cares about this fight, all this and that. And yes, I do see it. I do understand that this isn't the biggest fight that they could have added to UFC. But I'm really excited about Kayla Harrison being signed to the UFC. I know I'm not really the biggest women's MMA fan. Pennington versus Mayra Bueno Silva was one of the worst fights of all time. 100% is up there with one of the worst title fights of all time. But I think Kayla Harrison's going to add a lot of interest to the division. She's a big-time finisher. A lot of her wins come in the first round. A lot of her wins aren't over that great competition, though. It is worth noting. You know, like she was fighting Caitlin Young, who was 12-12. And Moknakina, who's good, but 6-2 at the time. Like, a lot of fighters that she's beaten aren't that great, but you can see the skill that she has. She's got 2 wins, I believe, over Larissa Pacheco, and then 1 loss to Larissa Pacheco. Maybe Pacheco could eventually get signed to the UFC. I saw that the PFL has dropped a couple of fighters recently. It seems like a lot of the fighters that the PFL is acquiring from Bellator, the PFL doesn't actually want. I saw 2 women's fighters get dropped from the PFL. One of them had a 9-7 record and was on a losing streak. I don't think the UFC has any interest in her. But one of them was 10-4 and was on quite a good winning streak. So maybe you see a couple of these fighters from the PFL that are getting dropped from the new version of the PFL from Bellator get signed to the promotion. And of course, as you guys may or may not know, the PFL is hosting a massive event. I believe it's next month. Massive champions versus champions event. I'm going to take a very backwards route to get to the event here. Here is it. Here we go. PFL versus Bellator champs. Massive event. Huge event. It's going to be pretty big. I'm assuming that, yeah, it's just going to be a big event, really. That's kind of all I have to say. I'll do a video on that when it does come around. But this is a UFC 300 video. It's also a tester for my new audio. I know Diego Lopez is going to be fighting on this card against Sadiq Yusuff. I was actually thinking of just making a standalone video on it because I think Diego Lopez is a fighter that could have a massive 2024. And being on UFC 300 is a very good start for Diego Lopez. If he can beat if Diego Lopez can beat Sadiq Yusuff, Lopez is going to be a star, man. Like, Diego Lopez, I feel like, is a really, really good pickup from the UFC, especially since it was on short notice. And I know we were probably potentially expecting some sort of Israel Adesanya fight, as Dana White did hint at Israel Adesanya maybe coming back. They were going to talk about Israel Adesanya in the matchmakers meeting, which they've obviously had today when they announced this fight, and also the Lopez fight. But that's it. That's kind of it for the video. I mean, Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison. What do you think of it? What do you think of the audio? What do you think of UFC 300? I'll see you guys in the next video. Hopefully, sometime or around this time tomorrow, we get another good UFC 300 announcement. The card is taking a little bit of shape. I'm getting a little bit nervous though. There's 10 fights on the card. I don't know if UFC 300 is going to have any more than 14 fights. So these next 4 fights that the UFC announces has to be really, really good. Because that Bonacle versus Cody Brundage fight is really sticking out like a sore thumb right now. And I'm just looking at that fight. I'm thinking, man, that is wasting a spot that we could have a really good fight on, you know? Like, I don't know. Let me know what you think. And I'll see you guys in the next one.